Does Woram know?
No.
Will you tell him?
Does Woram know yet? He asks. Zola can barely breathe. No. Will you tell him? Silence. Then the smallest shake of her head. 3 feet away, a man in torn clothes and a fake beard feels his heart sink. Because every word she's saying was never meant for him to hear. And in less than a minute, this hospital hallway is about to find out that the Beggar controls one of the largest business empires in Seoul. Nobody here knows who he really is. Not the nurses rushing past him. Not the doctors. Not even the woman he's supposed to marry in 9 days. He came here wearing rags to find out if she loved him without his money. What he heard in that hallway would force him to choose between the woman he loved and the family that made him a billionaire. Let's rewind to where it all began, 9 days before the wedding that was supposed to be the biggest event Seoul had seen all year. Woram Chai was not supposed to be sitting in his own kitchen at midnight, quietly falling apart. He was the future of Wonshin Group, one of South Korea's biggest business empires, with fingers in construction, shipping, entertainment, and a few things nobody outside the family liked to talk about too loudly. He grew up watching his father shake hands with presidents and bury enemies in boardrooms instead of graves. He learned early that in his world, love and business were rarely two separate things. So when he fell for Zola Adair, an American woman with no interest in his money, no fear of his father, and no patience for fake smiles, he thought he had finally found something real. Until one night changed everything. It happened at their engagement dinner, 3 weeks before the story you just heard in that hospital hallway. The room was full of soft candlelight, imported wine, and Zola's closest friend, Brielle, laughing a little too loudly with a glass in her hand.
Girl, what happens if the Chais wake up one day and decide you're not fancy enough for their world?
It was meant as a joke. Everyone at the table laughed. Everyone except Woram, who was walking back from the bar with 2 glasses of champagne, was close enough to hear Zola's answer before she noticed him. Zola smiled and said,
I've survived worse than being underestimated.
That was it. That was the whole sentence. She didn't say she'd fight for him. She didn't say his money meant nothing to her. She said she'd survived worse. And Woram, standing there holding 2 glasses of champagne like a fool, felt something cold slide straight into his chest. He told himself it was nothing. He smiled, walked over, handed her the drink, and kissed her cheek like a man who hadn't just heard something that would keep him awake for the next 3 weeks. But some sentences don't leave once they get in. See, Woram had been burned before. Years earlier, there was a woman named Seoyeon, the daughter of one of his father's business partners. Everyone said she was perfect for him. Smart, polished, raised in the same world he was raised in. He believed, for almost a year, that she loved him. Then one evening at a family gathering, he overheard her talking to her older brother in the garden.
So you're really doing this? Marrying into the Che family?
Yes, it's what I have to do.
But is this what you want?
It doesn't matter. I don't love him yet, but I'll grow into it. Have you seen what he's set to inherit?
Four sentences. That's all it took to end something Woram had convinced himself was love. He walked away that night without saying a word to her. He simply stopped calling. Months later, he found out she'd already moved on to another wealthy family, like changing outfits. Since then, every woman who smiled at him carried an invisible question mark. Every, I love you, came with fine print only he could see. He hated himself for it, but fear doesn't care what you hate. It just stays. So when Zola said those 5 words at the engagement dinner, I've survived worse than being underestimated, Woram's old wound cracked open again. He didn't tell her. He didn't tell anyone. Except for one person. Behram had been his bodyguard and closest confidant for 15 years. If Woram trusted anyone on earth besides his own instincts, it was Behram. 3 days after the dinner, Woram called him into his private office at 2 in the morning.
I need you to help me with something. It's 2 a.m. This is either business or trouble. I want to disguise myself as a beggar. Somewhere she'll cross paths with me. You want to do what?
I want to know if Zola would treat a man with nothing the same way she treats me, Wuram said. I want to see her when she thinks no one important is watching. Behram exhaled slowly. Sir, with respect, this family does not survive careless mistakes. If anyone photographs you, if anyone recognizes you, this becomes a scandal 9 days before your wedding. Your father will not forgive that kind of exposure. Then make sure no one recognizes me. Behram studied him for a long moment. This isn't about Zola, is it? Not really. Wuram didn't answer right away. I don't know anymore, he finally admitted. I just need to know if what we have is real, or if I'm about to spend the rest of my life waiting for her to leave. Behram sighed, the kind of sigh that meant he'd already lost this argument. Fine. But we do this my way. If you touch your left ear twice, I will pull you out immediately. No questions, no arguments. Agreed. And Behram added, using his first name instead of Sir, which he rarely did, if this test destroys something that was never broken, that's on you. Not on her. Those words followed Wuram all through that sleepless night. The next morning, before he even reached for the disguise, his father called him down to the study, and that visit stayed with him just as long. Chai Sung-jae was already standing by the window when Wuram walked in, a cup of untouched tea cooling on his desk. The merger closes the same week as your wedding, Sung-jae said without turning around. Every investor in that room will be watching how you carry yourself, not just how you smile for cameras. I'm aware, father. Are you? Sung-jae finally turned to face him.
Marriage in this family has never been about love, Warren. It's about protecting what took 3 generations to build.
I'm getting married in 9 days, not signing away the company.
I can see it in your eyes, Warren. There's doubt there. They are not as different as you think. This family has survived scandal before. It has never survived weakness.
Wuram said nothing, but the word sat heavy in his chest as he left the study, because strangely, his father had just permitted him to do exactly what he was already planning. Resolve it quietly. The next morning, in a small rented apartment his family didn't officially own, Wuram Chai disappeared, and in his place stood a stranger. He stared at himself in a cracked mirror. Gray dust rubbed into his hair. A rough, uneven beard was glued carefully along his jaw. A stained gray coat, 2 sizes too big, the kind you'd find abandoned behind a market stall. Shoes with the sole peeled halfway open on one side. No one would look at this man and see one Shin Group. No one would see the face that appeared in business magazines or the man whose wedding was already trending on social media across Korea. Behram stood by the door, arms crossed, watching him with quiet unease. Once you walk out that door, sir, you are nobody. Remember that. People will not just ignore you. Some of them will look through you like you don't exist. Good, Wuram said. That's exactly what I need. Insadong was busy that morning, filled with tourists snapping photos of traditional shops, students hurrying to class, and street vendors calling out prices. Wuram sat near the corner of a narrow alley, an old paper cup resting in his lap, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to be invisible. A group of teenagers walked past without glancing down. A woman pulled her son slightly closer as she passed, not cruel, just cautious. An old street vendor placed a small rice cake beside his shoe without a word, then nodded once and kept walking. That small act of kindness from a stranger hit harder than Wuram expected. By afternoon, he moved closer to the boutique district, where he knew Zola often met her wedding planner. His heart was pounding so hard he almost convinced himself to abandon the whole plan. Then he saw her. Zola stepped out of a car in a soft cream dress, her hair pulled back neatly, the engagement ring catching the afternoon light. Beside her walked Brielle, scrolling through her phone and talking fast about seating arrangements. Zola laughed at something Brielle said, and for a second, Wuram almost forgot why he was sitting on the ground pretending to be someone else. Then her eyes moved across the sidewalk. Across the crowd. Across him. He lowered his head immediately, gripping the paper cup so tightly his knuckles ached. Her footsteps slowed. Zola, come on, we're already late, Brielle said, not noticing anything unusual. But Zola had stopped walking. Her shadow fell directly over Wurm's torn shoes. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then her voice came, gentle, careful. Sir, are you hungry? Wurm lifted his face just enough to look at her, the woman he loved, staring directly into the eyes of a man she didn't recognize as her own fiancé. Her eyes searched his face, not deeply, not the way she looked at people she truly cared about, just enough to figure out if he was dangerous, desperate, or simply another face the city had learned to walk past. His throat tightened. He had imagined this exact moment for days, telling himself he'd stay calm, controlled, like a man simply running a test. But sitting there, watching sunlight touch her hair, all he wanted to do was rip off the fake beard and apologize for ever doubting her. Brielle stepped closer, lowering her voice. Zola, please. We cannot be late for this fitting. Zola didn't move. I haven't eaten since yesterday, Wurm said, forcing his voice into something rough and older, the lie scraping against his throat. Something shifted across Zola's face, quick, private, gone before Brielle could catch it. She opened her purse. There are shelters for this, Brielle said, arms crossed. You can't personally save every man on the sidewalk, Zola. Zola ignored her, pulling out a folded bill. She crouched slightly to place it in the cup, and that's when her eyes landed on his hands. Wurm froze. There was a small white scar across his right thumb, from a broken glass bottle the night he proposed to her. They'd laughed about it in the emergency room while she cried and called him reckless. He curled his fingers too late. Your hand, Zola said quietly. Old cut, he muttered, pulling it beneath the sleeve of the coat. She stayed still for a second longer than necessary, and Wurm felt his heart slam against his ribs, certain his entire disguise was about to fall apart in the middle of a busy street. Then Brielle's voice cut through the moment. The planner is waiting. Zola placed the bill gently into the cup, not tossing it carelessly, but setting it down like his dignity actually mattered to her. Please get something warm to eat, she said softly. Thank you, Wurm whispered. She turned to walk away, and relief and disappointment crashed into each other inside his chest at the same time. Then a gust of wind lifted the edge of his coat, exposing the expensive lining underneath that he'd failed to tear properly that morning. Brielle saw it first. Her eyes narrowed. Wait, she said. Zola stopped. Brielle stepped closer, studying him the way someone studies a puzzle that doesn't quite fit. That coat, she said slowly. Where did you get that? Found it, Wurm muttered, looking down. In an alley. Brielle gave a short, humorless laugh. Of course you did. Brielle, Zola said quietly. No, I'm serious, Brielle said, arms folded tighter. Look at his shoes, completely ruined. But that coat had money in it once. Something's off. The accusation landed harder than Wurm expected, not because he feared being caught, but because some part of him, hiding underneath the lie, actually felt insulted on behalf of the man he was pretending to be. Zola's jaw tightened. Even if he's not telling the full truth, she said quietly, hunger is still hunger. Brielle stared at her like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're impossible, you know that. Zola turned back to Wurm, and for one terrifying second, he thought she might actually recognize the way he held pain behind his eyes, the one thing no fake beard could disguise. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small white card. Not more cash this time. An address. I volunteer here sometimes, she said. They serve a warm meal around 1. Tell them I sent you. Brielle's expression hardened, but she said nothing else. Wurm stared at the card in his hand. Zola volunteered somewhere. In 2 years of dinners, trips, and late-night conversations, she had never once mentioned it. Why hide something like that? Before he could think of an answer, Brielle pulled Zola gently by the arm, and the two women disappeared through the glass doors of the boutique. Wurm sat there long after they'd gone, the folded bill sitting quietly in his cup, the small white card trembling slightly in his fingers. He had come here expecting to catch her in a lie. Instead, he was the one holding secrets now, and somewhere deep inside him, a small, uncomfortable thought was starting to form. What if the woman he was testing had far bigger secrets than he ever imagined, secrets that had nothing to do with money at all? The next morning, Wurm couldn't stop thinking about that white card sitting on his nightstand. Zola Adair, the woman he was supposed to marry in 8 days, had a whole side of her life he knew nothing about. And the more he stared at that card, the more he realized something uncomfortable. He wasn't just testing her anymore. He was chasing an answer he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. By late morning, Wuram was back in disguise, sitting outside a modest building tucked between a laundromat and an old bookstore in Itaewon. A faded sign above the door read Han River Hope Center. This was the address on the card. He almost didn't go in. Some small, proud part of him whispered that this was beneath him, that heirs to business empires didn't sit in shelters pretending to need a warm meal. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and his had grown too loud to ignore. The moment he stepped inside, the smell hit him first. Warm soup, fresh bread, and the faint scent of laundry detergent drifting from a back room. The building wasn't fancy. Paint peeled near the windows, and the chairs didn't match, but something filled that space that money couldn't easily buy. It felt warm in a way his family's marble hallways never did. Children laughed near a small bookshelf in the corner. An elderly man played a slow game of Beduck with a young volunteer. 2 women folded stacks of donated clothes by the door. Nobody in that room looked important, but somehow, everybody looked like they mattered. Then Wuram saw her. Zola had traded her cream dress and heels for simple sneakers and an old volunteer apron tied loosely around her waist. Her hair was pulled back, sleeves rolled up, and she was already elbow-deep in the kitchen, stirring a large pot of soup like she'd done it 100 times before. Nobody clapped for her. Nobody thanked her out loud. Nobody even looked surprised to see her there, which told Wuram everything he needed to know. She belonged here. He found a seat in the corner and accepted a bowl of soup he didn't need, because refusing it would have insulted people who genuinely believed he did. An old man beside him leaned over and asked, "First time here?" Wuram nodded. The old man chuckled. "Don't worry. Miss Zola scares everyone the first day." "Scares them how?" "By remembering your name," the old man said, smiling. "Most people feed you once so they can feel good about themselves and never come back. She keeps coming back." "How long has she been coming here?" Wuram asked carefully. The old man scratched his chin, thinking. "Maybe 4 years now." 4 years. Wuram had known Zola for 2. Which meant she had started coming to this shelter long before she ever met him, long before his name, his family, or his money meant anything in her life. She hadn't done this to impress him. She had chosen this on her own, quietly, without needing an audience. Across the room, a small voice called out. "Miss Zola." A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, ran over and wrapped both arms around Zola's waist. "Hey, Minji," Zola said, smiling instantly. "You missed my drawing yesterday," Minji said, pouting. "I know. I'm sorry, sweetheart." "I made another one," Minji said proudly, holding up a crayon drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Zola laughed softly. "Who's the king in this one?" Minji giggled. "You." Zola shook her head gently. "No, sweetheart. I help people." "That doesn't make anyone a king." Minji thought about that for a second. "It makes you safe." Wuram looked away quickly, because something about that small, innocent sentence hurt more than it should have. Hours passed. Wuram watched, listened, and slowly felt his suspicion crack under the weight of everything he was seeing. Then, just when he thought he understood her, a new crack appeared. A young volunteer named Yulan walked in holding a stack of donation receipts and went straight to Zola. "You need to sign these," he said. She glanced at them. "What are these for?" "The scholarship transfer," Yulan said. "The accountant needs a record of where the funding came from." Zola's expression shifted, just slightly. "I'll handle it," she said quickly, sliding the papers beneath a folder before anyone else could read them. Too late. Wuram had already caught one line. Adair Family Education Fund. His stomach turned. Her family's name. Why hide something like that? And more importantly, where was a wedding consultant with modest savings getting enough money to fund an entire scholarship program? For the first time since walking into that shelter, Wuram's uncertainty returned, not because he thought she was lying about who she was, but because he now understood there was clearly something she hadn't told him. The question that kept repeating in his mind was simple. Why? The shelter closed a little after 8 that evening. Wu Ram slipped outside before Zola noticed him, and Bahram pulled the car around the corner exactly like they'd planned. Across the street, Zola stood beneath a street lamp, waiting for her ride, looking tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Her phone rang, and she answered almost instantly. "No, don't tell Wu Ram," she said, her voice tight. Wu Ram's whole body went still inside the car. "I'll handle it myself," she continued, turning slightly away from the street. There was a pause, then her voice cracked. "If he finds out before the wedding, everything could fall apart." The call ended. Wu Ram sat frozen in the darkness of the back seat, staring straight ahead. Bahram glanced back at him through the rearview mirror. "Sir." Neither of them said anything for a long moment, because after everything they had just witnessed, one impossible truth now sat quietly between them. Zola was hiding something from him. And whatever it was, she believed it was big enough to destroy their entire future together. The next afternoon, Wu Ram's phone rang while he sat alone in the rented apartment, still wearing half his disguise. It was his college friend, Yula. He answered using a voice distorter app, an old habit from years of avoiding unwanted calls.
Who's calling?
Nice try. You think I don't recognize your breathing pattern after 15 years of friendship?
What do you want, Yulha?
I need to see you. You've basically disappeared.
I'm busy.
No, you're hiding. Big difference. Brielle called me.
What did she say?
She asked a strange question. She wanted to know if you were planning some kind of test on Zola.
What did you tell her?
The truth. I told her when you're about to make a big decision, you don't usually plan something calculated. You panic, you get scared, you've always been like that. Even back in university.
Scared. Not calculating. Not suspicious. Scared. The word hit harder than Wu Ram expected, because Yula had known him long enough to understand exactly where his fear came from. That evening, Wu Ram returned to the shelter, this time not to test Zola but to understand her. She wasn't there. Instead, Yulan recognized him instantly.
You're back.
Yeah.
Miss Zola isn't here today. She's at Soul Grace Children's Hospital.
The hospital?
Every week. She reads to the kids there.
Has for a while now. Years. Again. Always years. Always somewhere she had gone long before Wu Ram ever entered her life. He wandered toward the small reading corner, where he found Minji sitting quietly, coloring by herself.
Hi, Minji.
You came back.
I did.
I knew you would.
How did you know that?
Miss Ness said sad people usually come back. She says people need somewhere safe before they can tell the truth.
Minji, is Miss Sola happy?
Sometimes. But sometimes she cries after everyone leaves.
Why?
I don't know. But she always says the same thing. I hope he never hates me.
He?
The man she's going to marry.
He couldn't speak. A child had just unknowingly handed him a piece of Zola's heart, not confidence, not certainty, but fear. The fear that one day, he might hate her. But for what? Before Wu Ram could ask anything else, Yulan rushed into the room excitedly. Minji, guess what? Miss Zola called. She's bringing someone special tomorrow. Minji's face lit up instantly. Really? Who? She only said it's someone the children have wanted to meet for a very long time, Yulan said, reading from his phone. She said tomorrow will be important. A strange, uneasy feeling settled deep in Wu Ram's chest. Someone the children had wanted to meet. Whoever it was, one thing already felt clear to him. This wasn't the language of romance, it was the language of history, someone tied to a piece of Zola's life that existed long before he did. He rushed outside and immediately called Bahram. I need every schedule Zola has for tomorrow, he said the moment Bahram picked up. What's happened? Bahram asked. Wu Ram looked back toward the shelter, where the children were already excitedly decorating handmade welcome signs. I think my fiancée has been planning something behind my back, he said slowly, and I don't think it has anything to do with money. For the first time since starting this test, Wu Ram wasn't afraid Zola would fail it. He was afraid he had already failed her first. The next morning, Wu-Ram barely slept. He kept replaying Minji's words in his head. Someone the children had wanted to meet for a very long time. He didn't know why, but every part of him sensed that whatever Zola was planning, it was about to answer every question that had been building since that engagement dinner 3 weeks ago. By 10 o'clock, he stood outside Seoul Grace Children's Hospital, back in disguise, the fake beard itching against his jaw, his torn shoes soaked from the light morning rain. Behram had tried to talk him out of coming. "Sir, your father already suspects something," Behram had warned him that morning. "If he finds out you're wandering around Seoul dressed like this, days before your wedding, it won't just be embarrassing. It will be a scandal one Shin group can't control." "I have to know, Behram," Wu-Ram had said simply. "I can't marry her carrying this kind of doubt." So there he sat, in the hospital lobby, blending into the quiet chaos of doctors, worried parents, and tired volunteers. Nobody looked at him twice. That was the strange gift of looking poor. People stopped seeing you as a threat and started seeing you as furniture. At 11:15, Zola walked in. She wasn't alone. Minji walked beside her, gripping her hand tightly, wearing a bright yellow dress for the occasion. Behind them came Yulan and a few other volunteers carrying boxes wrapped in colorful paper. Children from the ward had already begun gathering excitedly in the hallway. "Is he coming?" one boy asked, practically bouncing on his toes. "I think so," Zola said, smiling gently. "You promised," the boy said. "I know," she said. "And I don't break promises." That sentence hit Wu-Ram harder than he expected, because there was a time he would have said the same thing about her without hesitation. Now that certainty felt like it belonged to someone else. He stayed near the end of the hallway, hidden behind a row of chairs, watching the children's excitement grow with every passing minute. Then Minji said something that made his blood run cold. "Miss Ness said he's brave," she told another child. Zola, overhearing, added softly, "He is. Even when he's scared." A shadow crossed her face as she said it. "Especially then," she whispered. Wu-Ram's chest tightened. Whoever this man was, Zola clearly hadn't just invited him. She had been waiting for him, in the way you wait for someone who once shared your worst day. A nurse approached Zola quietly, holding a clipboard. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. Zola nodded, though her hands were visibly shaking. "Yes." "What if he says no?" "Then he says no," Zola answered, forcing a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And if he never forgives you?" the nurse asked gently. Zola's smile disappeared completely. "Then I'll live with that. Forgive her." There it was again, that same fear Minji had mentioned the day before. That same quiet dread was hiding underneath every act of kindness Zola had shown since this whole test began. Before Wu-Ram could move closer, a hand touched his shoulder from behind. He spun around, and his stomach dropped. Brielle stood there in sunglasses and a raincoat, despite the clear weather outside. "You really committed to this whole thing, huh?" she said quietly, loud enough only for him to hear. Every muscle in Wu-Ram's body locked in place. "You've mistaken me for someone else." "No," Brielle said, removing her sunglasses slowly. "I really haven't." The hallway seemed to blur around them. There was only Wu-Ram and the one person who had apparently seen through his disguise from the very beginning. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "Since the coat," Brielle said. "The stitching gave you away days ago." His mouth went dry. "Did you tell Zola?" Brielle laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Do you honestly think I would do that to her?" He didn't answer because deep down, he had already assumed the worst about her. He had decided long ago that Brielle was just a judgmental friend who didn't approve of him. It fit the story he built in his head. And once you believe a story about someone, every little thing seems to prove it right. "I used to think you'd break her heart," Brielle said. "Turns out she was the one bracing herself to lose you. 2 years of it. She never believed she deserved you, Wu-Ram." None of it made sense to him. Nothing fit together. Why not? Brielle's expression shifted from sharp to something closer to sadness. "You really don't know, do you?" "Know what?" His voice sounded foreign even to himself. Brielle opened her mouth to answer, then stopped abruptly, because down the hallway, sudden applause erupted. Children began cheering loudly. Zola turned toward the hospital entrance, and whatever she had been waiting for had finally arrived. Brielle grabbed his arm, her fingers trembling slightly. Wu Ram, listen to me. If she doesn't tell you herself, today, she swallowed hard, you're never going to forgive yourself for what you did to find this out. Then she let go and stepped back, and Wu Ram turned toward the entrance just as the doors opened. The whole hallway erupted into cheers. Children shouted excitedly. Nurses smiled. Parents stepped aside to make room. A man in his early 40s walked in. Jeans, a simple navy jacket, the tired expression of someone who had been through more than his calm face let on. Not a celebrity. Not a stranger to this place, either. The children didn't care who he was to the outside world. They only cared that he had finally come. Minji ran to him first, wrapping her arms around his waist. You came. He knelt and hugged her tightly. I promised. That word again. Promised. Zola was already walking toward him, not with romance in her eyes, but with something closer to relief, the kind of relief you feel when something fragile somehow survives against the odds. Thank you, she said quietly. I almost didn't come, the man admitted. I know, she said. But you did. They stood there for a long moment, looking at each other with the kind of familiarity shared only by people who had lived through the same unbearable thing. Then the man turned toward the children and clapped his hands together. All right, who wants to hear an embarrassing story from when I was younger? The children screamed with excitement. Laughter filled the entire hallway, but Wu Ram heard none of it, because all he could focus on was Zola's face, and the one question repeating endlessly in his head. Who is this man to her? Beside him, Brielle whispered under her breath, oh, this is bad. Wu Ram turned sharply. Who is he? She didn't answer right away. Who is he asked again, louder this time. Brielle closed her eyes briefly before answering. The person she's been terrified to tell you about. The floor seemed to vanish beneath his feet. For nearly an hour, Wu Ram watched from a distance as the man played games, told stories, and made the children laugh until their cheeks hurt. He knew every child's name. Every child knew his. There was history here, deep history, the kind that doesn't build overnight. Finally, the children were led away for lunch, and the hallway slowly emptied. Zola and the man remained near a window overlooking the city, unaware that Wu Ram had followed close enough to hear. You didn't have to come, Zola said softly. Yes, the man said. I did. I'm scared, she admitted. I know. What if he hates me? There it was, that same fear again, always circling back to hatred, always circling back to her. Then he's a fool, the man said gently. Zola laughed weakly. You haven't met Wu Ram. No, he agreed. But I've met you. A moment of silence passed between them. I should have told him from the beginning, Zola finally said. Then why didn't you? Her answer came so softly that Wu Ram almost missed it entirely. Because when someone looks at you the way Wu Ram looks at me, she paused, her voice breaking slightly, you don't want to become the reason that looks disappear forever. Wu Ram's chest ached, not in some poetic sense, but in a real, physical way, as though every suspicion he had been carrying for weeks had suddenly turned into a weight pressing directly against his ribs. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out an old photograph. Wu Ram couldn't see it clearly from where he stood, but Zola could. Her face lost all color instantly. I haven't looked at that in years, she whispered. Maybe it's time, the man said gently. She took the photograph with visibly shaking hands, and then, without warning, she began to cry. Not the loud, dramatic kind of crying. The quiet kind. The kind reserved for people who are simply too exhausted to keep holding themselves together. The man pulled her into a hug, not like someone in love, but like family, like someone who had carried the same grief for just as long. Wu Ram felt something shift inside him, a strange mixture of guilt and understanding rising at the same time, because he had spent days inventing betrayals in his own mind, when all along, he had only been witnessing pain he never understood. Wu Ram, a voice said suddenly from behind him. He turned quickly. Behram had somehow found him. We need to go. Now, Behram said, his tone unusually urgent. What happened? Wu Ram asked. Behram lowered his voice. Your father knows. Ice ran through Wu Ram's veins. That's impossible. He knows about the disguise, Behram said. I don't know how, but he's already on his way here, and sir, he is furious. Of course, his father was furious. Chai Sung-jae had built one Shin group on image, control, and certainty. A son dressed as a beggar days before a wedding meant to secure one of the biggest business mergers of the decade wasn't just embarrassing to him. It was dangerous. Where is he? Wu Ram asked. Outside. Already inside the building, actually. Before Wu Ram could respond, the elevator doors opened, and there he was. Chai Sung-jae, 68 years old, immaculately dressed, radiating the same intimidating presence he always carried into every room he entered. He didn't notice Wu Ram at first. His eyes went straight to Zola. "Miss Adair," he said, walking toward her. Zola quickly wiped her tears and turned. Her expression shifted the moment she saw him, not with fear, but with recognition, the kind of recognition that meant she had been expecting this confrontation for a long time. "Mr. Chai," she said quietly. The man beside her instinctively stepped back, sensing danger in the room. Sung-jae glanced around the hallway. "The children need to go elsewhere." Nobody moved at first. "I said the children need to leave," he repeated, and the authority in his voice cleared the hallway faster than any fire alarm could have. Within seconds, only 4 people remained. Sung-jae. Zola. The man from the children's ward. And Wu Ram, still hidden in his disguise, still watching everything unfold like a stranger inside his own life. Sung-jae faced Zola directly. "I have spent the last 2 days trying to understand why my son disappeared." She went visibly pale. "Wu Ram is missing." Sung-jae studied her carefully. "Interesting reaction," he said. "You genuinely didn't know. Where is he?" Zola asked, panic rising in her voice. Sung-jae ignored the question entirely. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope, the same kind Wu Ram had seen Zola receive from an older woman days earlier. Zola stopped breathing. "I believe this belongs to you," Sung-jae said. The man beside her stepped forward instantly. "You had no right to go looking into her past." "I have every right," Sung-jae said coldly, "when someone is preparing to marry my son while hiding information that could destroy his entire future." Destroy his future. The exact phrase Zola had used on that phone call outside the shelter. Everything came crashing together in that single moment. The envelope. The secret. The fear. All of it converging into one devastating point. Zola looked shattered, not exposed, but broken. "Please," she whispered. Sung-jae's expression didn't soften. "Does Wu Ram know?" he asked. Zola could barely breathe. "No. Will you tell him?" Silence stretched painfully long. Then came the smallest shake of her head. And that was the exact moment Wu Ram, standing 3 feet away in torn clothes and a crooked fake beard, felt every ounce of doubt he'd carried collapse into something far heavier than suspicion. He stepped forward before he even realized he was moving. The disguise no longer mattered. The lie no longer mattered. In that instant, everyone in the hallway turned and looked directly at him. "I know," Wu Ram said quietly. Zola's eyes widened in horror as recognition finally hit her. Wu Ram. The beard hung loosely from days of rain and sweat. He reached up and pulled it off completely, revealing his real face for the first time since this entire test began. "You've been here this whole time," she whispered. "I have," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I heard everything." Sung-jae's face went pale, an expression Wu Ram had never once seen on his father in his entire life. "What is this photograph, Zola?" Wu Ram asked, stepping closer, his hands shaking as he reached for the envelope his father was still holding. Nobody stopped him. Inside were old photographs. A car. Rain. A collapsed section of a bridge along the Han River. And a woman Wu Ram recognized instantly, a woman he hadn't seen in over 20 years, because she had died the night that bridge gave way. His mother. "This is my mother," Wu Ram said, his voice barely holding together. Zola nodded slowly, tears streaking down her face. "I was there," she whispered. "I was 17. The room spun around him. "You knew my mother?" "My father was driving," Zola said, her voice cracking. "He'd been drinking. We were on our way home, and he lost control of the car. It spun toward the guardrail." The man beside her, the one the children had been waiting for, placed a steady hand on her shoulder, not to protect her from Wu Ram, but simply to help her stay standing. "I got out," Zola continued. But my father couldn't. I ran into the road, screaming for help, and that's when your mother's car stopped. Wu Ram couldn't speak. He simply listened, every word landing like a weight he hadn't known he was carrying his whole life. She got me away from the wreck first, Zola whispered. Then she went back for my father. Silence swallowed the hallway. The bridge gave way while she was pulling him out, Zola said, her voice breaking completely now. She saved me. And then she died trying to save him, too. Wu Ram closed his eyes, the pieces of a story he'd been told for over 20 years finally collapsing into something far more painful and far more real. Why didn't anyone ever tell me this? He asked, turning toward his father. Sung Jae's voice was barely above a whisper. Because I told them not to. Wu Ram stared at him. You knew. I was angry, Sung Jae admitted, his composure cracking for the first time in Wu Ram's entire life. At everyone. The driver. The city for not repairing that bridge sooner. And especially the girl who survived when my wife didn't. Wu Ram turned to Zola. You've carried this for 22 years. She nodded, unable to speak through her tears. You blamed yourself for my mother's death, he said quietly, and you were terrified I would blame you too if I ever found out. Wouldn't you? She whispered. Wu Ram thought about every moment over the past week. The stranger who fed him without knowing his name. The little girl who trusted her completely. The years of quiet volunteering no one had ever asked her to do. The engagement ring she was willing to remove rather than let it become a weapon against her own compassion. I spent this entire week trying to find out if you were good enough for me, he said softly. The whole time, you were trying to prove you were good enough to even stand near my family. Tears kept falling as she looked at him. I'm not angry at you, Zola, he said. I'm angry that fear made both of us believe love had to be earned instead of simply given. She stepped toward him slowly, and he pulled her into his arms right there in that hospital hallway, disguise still hanging off his shoulders, his father standing frozen behind them, watching the truth finally breathe after 22 years of silence.
2 days later.
Seoul buzzed with headlines, but not about a scandal. Wu Ram and Zola were married, not inside some glass tower ballroom, but at the Han River Hope Center, surrounded by the children who had grown to love her long before the world ever knew her name. Minji carried the flowers down the aisle with the seriousness of someone completing the most important job of her life. Sung Jae stood before the small crowd and, for the first time publicly, spoke about his late wife's final act of courage, the kind of truth he had buried for over 2 decades out of grief disguised as anger. As the ceremony ended, Zola took Wu Ram's hand and whispered, "Your mother saved my life." He smiled gently.
She gave me you.
No, he said.
In the end,
She gave me you. In the end, she saved both of us. And that right there is the whole reason this story still gives people chills. Because the real danger was never losing money, or status, or reputation. The real danger was almost losing each other to fear, instead of trusting each other with the truth from the very beginning. If you were Wu Ram, would you have forgiven Zola, or would the secret have been too much to overcome? Tell me honestly in the comments. And if you enjoy stories with unexpected twists, subscribe because I've got another one waiting for you.